It was a marriage born of promise, a union I once believed to be perfect. I met Thomas when I was in my mid-20s, a young woman full of hope and dreams. He was charming, well-spoken, and everything I thought I needed in a partner. The wedding day arrived, and it felt like the beginning of something beautiful, something that would last forever. We moved into a quaint house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and for a while, everything seemed right. I remember the early days when we laughed together, talked late into the night, and made plans for the future. He was my rock, my everything. And then, when I became pregnant with our first child, I thought we would only grow stronger. But that was when I began to see a side of him that I had never noticed before. Thomas had always been protective, but his love began to morph into something darker. His temper, which I had never seen in the years we were dating, started to rear its ugly head. At first, it was small things, raised voices, sharp words. But soon, it turned into something I could not ignore, physical violence. I tried to justify his actions, blaming stress, work, anything to avoid the painful truth. But deep down, I knew this wasn't love. I was pregnant with our first child, and I couldn't imagine leaving him. My Christian upbringing had instilled in me a sense of duty, a belief that marriage was sacred and unbreakable. The vows we took weren't just words, they were a commitment for life. I could never break that promise. Besides, we had 4 children to think about now. How could I walk away? How could I be the one to tear our family apart? The violence continued. He would apologize, of course. He would cry, beg for forgiveness, and tell me how much he loved me. But the apologies always came after the damage was done. And as the years passed, the incidents became more frequent. I lived in constant fear, walking on eggshells, hoping and praying that each day would pass without incident. Then came the infidelity. At first, I couldn't believe it. Thomas had always been a man of great pride, and the idea that he would betray me, his wife, the mother of his children, seemed impossible. But it wasn't long before I uncovered the truth. He had been seeing someone else, a woman from his office. The betrayal stung more than the violence, and I felt my heart shatter. But even then, I couldn't leave. I had been taught that family was everything. Divorce was something that happened to other people, not to me. I was a mother now, and my children needed a father. I couldn't bear the thought of them growing up without him, even though he was nothing like the man I thought I married. I stayed, hoping for change, praying for the man I had once loved to return. The character assassination began soon after. Thomas's bitterness towards me became evident. He would say cruel things about me to our friends and family, painting me as the problem, the one who was always unhappy, always dissatisfied. It was a deliberate attempt to turn everyone against me. And for a while, it worked. People started to question my sanity, my decisions, my ability to care for our children. But I knew the truth. I had always known. The man I loved was a stranger now. The man I had married had disappeared, replaced by someone else, someone who had lost sight of the values that once defined him. I didn't know who he was anymore, but I couldn't leave. Not yet. The years passed, and the tension in our home grew unbearable. There were moments of fleeting happiness, moments when I thought maybe things would get better. But they never did. The violence, the infidelity, and the cruelty continued, like an unending storm. My children, now old enough to understand, began to notice the cracks in our marriage. They saw their father's anger, his absence, his disregard for us. And it broke my heart. I tried to shield them, to protect them from the ugliness that surrounded us. But it was impossible. The damage was done. My children grew up in a house filled with tension, fear, and resentment. I felt as though I had failed them, but I didn't know how to fix it. Then one day, After years of suffering, I made the hardest decision of my life. I left. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. I couldn't stay in a marriage that had destroyed me and was now threatening to destroy my children. But when I left, it wasn't with relief, it was with guilt. Guilt that I had failed, guilt that I couldn't keep my family intact. Thomas remarried not long after our divorce, to one of my friends, someone I had once trusted. It hurt, but I was numb by then. They moved into a new house, started a new life. For a brief moment, I thought he had finally found happiness, that maybe this woman was the answer to his problems. But the years passed, and I saw the truth in his life. The man who had once been so confident and full of promise was now broken. His new marriage crumbled, just as ours had. The woman he married left him, and he was left alone, living a life full of regret and misery. I watched from a distance, my heart heavy with a strange mix of sadness and vindication. Thomas had never been the man he promised to be. He had never changed, never taken responsibility for his actions. And now, as the years had passed, he was paying the price. I, on the other hand, had found a way to heal. It wasn't easy, and there were many nights I cried myself to sleep. But I had my children, and I had my faith. I rebuilt my life, piece by piece, finding strength in the love of my family and the support of true friends. I would never forget the man I once loved, the man who had once been my everything. But I knew now that I had to let go. The love I had for him had been lost in the shadows of the man he had become, a man I could never understand. And though I had loved him once, it was clear that love could not survive in the wreckage he had left behind. The story of my marriage had ended in pain, but it was not the end of my life. I had learned that sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes, you have to choose yourself, your happiness, and your peace. And that's exactly what I did.